learning and seeing movements, you know. It really wasn't until someone, you know, some movement catalysts, movement practitioners over in North India actually came over to where I was and helped us start do some training and show us how to get some handles on these things, that the things really took off. I had to see, I had to experience it myself. It wasn't something that anyone could teach me, and it wasn't something I read in a book. I had to see it, I had to experience it. I need someone to walk with me to show me how to do it. And then I started doing it, and then it was just God's time for that place, and things just took off. Why don't you guys just enumerate what are some of the challenges now? Like, what is preventing your churches, the churches that maybe you have some level of stewardship to encourage? What is preventing them? What's preventing your average believer in your churches from engaging in, you know, movement formalization, you know, 2 and 3 activities? Just off the cuff. What do you guys think?
They're content.
Huh?
They're content.
Yeah, okay. They're content.
Comfort.
Comfort, sure. All right. What else?
They expect other people to evangelize. Their churches are declining,
Yeah.
at least in Cincinnati. I'm probably sure they're not doing it around here, but they're declining, and the members aren't evangelizing. They think it's for somebody else to do.
Yeah, I heard it said Baptists love evangelism as long as someone else is doing it, right?
I think that goes back to, you mentioned the APAS. What's the job of the APAS? What's the job of those ministers? To build up the body, to build up the saints for acts of what?
Ministry.
Ministry. So if they're doing all the ministry, they're actually not doing their job.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, if they're the ones doing all the ministry, they're actually not
That's
doing
what you're
their
paid
job.
for,
Their job's
preacher.
secure.
Well, yeah, I mean, the institutional church brings about the clergy laity mind frame as a natural consequence of being institutionalized.
Yeah.
Because it now is a formal entity that we have specialized, and we've created institutions to specialize people to do certain things. And so what we're really, to me, the challenge, it's easy to see the challenge,
Yeah.
but how do you change that? I mean, obviously it's the Spirit of God has to make the greatest movements in this, because we can't just walk back in. This is like our viral and our social change thing we started this whole day with.
Yeah.
I can go back all fired up about this
Yeah.
and say this is what we need to do, but that's a viral thing because it's information.
Yeah.
But moving the heart to realize that we're the institutional church that's later on in the book of Revelation, by the time you get to Sardis and other places, we're the cold church. Well, we're the lukewarm church. We think we have everything we need. All those latter two couple of churches where we're looking at, is that a good picture? I don't know, but it feels like that's where it went in the book of Revelation, where those churches that started out, they were really strong, but they moved to that institutional. Movements have been identified. Is there a reason that we are supposed to stop it? Is there a God-given reason that we are supposed to stop it? Because Jude says defend the faith once and all for delivered to the saints. So we know that we've got to have training to defend the faith.
Yeah.
But we can't lose that connectivity. We become sequential instead of all this has to happen at once.
So take the Revelation 2 example. I think this is really interesting. So where were all those other churches located? The 7 churches mentioned. First one's Ephesus, but where were the other ones located?
Thyatira.
Yeah,
Sardis.
where? What province?
Asia
what area?
Minor. Asia Minor.
Okay, all right. So we saw in Acts
Turkey.
19, right, when the Hall of Tyrannus, out of Ephesus, what happened? The word of the Lord went where?
To Asia Minor. And
All of Asia.
Right.
All of Asia, both Jews and Greeks, heard the word of the Lord. Where was the word of God ringing out, emanating from? Ephesus. Right? Where were, and you fast forward to Revelation 2, a couple generations later, and they're writing to all churches, to these churches in Asia.
Okay.
So where did this movement start from? Ephesus.
Ephesus. Yep.
What was the first church to kind of lose their first love, you know? So in that letter, right, they're commended. Ephesus, the Ephesians are commended, right, that they're testing those who claim to be prophets that prove to be false. Right? So there is a commendation, like you guys are doing good on the holding the line, on testing those who claim that they're prophets and not, on not giving into bad doctrine, right? So they don't lose that. They're commended for that. That's what they're doing good, okay?
Right.
So it's like, okay, defending
That's
doctrine and doing all this good
characteristics
stuff.
of institution also.
Yeah, characteristics of institutions. Like, you guys are doing great at defending doctrine,
Right.
of testing people who are claiming to be apostles that really are not. You're not giving, so
Right.
so that we want to make sure that it's not an either or, it's a both and. It's like, you guys are doing good, but what you've lost, you are the hub, right?
Mhm.
Go back to the love that you had at first. What was the first for Ephesus? The first was Ephesus was the 2 years that Paul, the Apostle Paul, and the 12 or so disciples leaving the synagogue in the hall of Tyrannus and the word of the Lord ringing out through all of Asia Minor. That's what the first love looked like in the church of Ephesus.
Gotcha.
What does it, so in just thinking about that, like, what is that, where are our churches? Like, what would the letter of the angel to the churches in our areas be? I feel like a lot, in a big sense, it's going to be a lot like Ephesus. Go ahead.
Well, when we were studying this before in the book of Acts, we learned that a lot of times persecution preceded the movement here, because they got stuck here. And one of the things that I found out in China, they started this whole thing, and then they fell into the same trap. I mean, they were sending people, some of those, I know some Chinese friends who came here to get their degree in seminary and to go back to China and stuff like that. There are some house churches in China right now that run 400, 500, not in a little scattered place, in one building. So they lost the house church movement that was going crazy. They've lost some of that. So what happened? China now is they're kicking us out of that country left and right. And their own people, the leaders of these house churches, are being thrown in jail, beaten up, and stuff like that. Persecution is coming again. So I'm wondering, if we don't do something intentionally, God will possibly do something, and we'll face persecution, which will possibly force us back there instead of our comfort place.
Or persecution is actually a gift that God gives to the church that's proclaiming. I mean, that's right out of Philippians 2, or Philippians 1, 28 or whatever. Is the gift of not only to believe in Him, but to suffer for His sake. Often the persecution was a gift that Jesus allowed to happen to His bride, because they were proclaiming the gospel, and through faith, through persecution, put a megaphone to that gospel that they were standing for. So I think we need to stay away from running to or running from suffering for Christ, understanding that, like, God gives suffering for a purpose, and also the faith to endure, and so we can trust Him in that. But are we being faithful, right? So that when God does allow suffering for Christ to come, that there's any gospel to be seen in that. And so going back to the questions, like, what does it actually look like in this institutional context? How do we create space so that we can be in the sweet spot? And that is the one thing that we are learning and we are discovering as we're pursuing this in the U.S. And so I want to go into, here's some of the things that we've found and that we're discovering that is actually helping in this context. How do we equip and empower and mobilize churches, right, and believers to give them space to work in this sweet spot where they are? Understanding that God's going to separate and send some of them overseas, where, hey, guess what? If we're practicing this here, not only will it strengthen and multiply the existing church, but it's also a great pipeline for developing missionaries that can go to this, right?
That's right.
So one thing we found. So here's one thing. One thing we found in serving with existing churches, there are really three opportunities that we see. Churches that are hungry for making disciples, but they're really just saying, we just need help. We need to figure out how to make disciples. We're not making disciples. Okay? That is an on-ramp for training that has been really huge in the U.S. Just churches saying, hey, we need help. Help us make disciples. Second on-ramp that we've seen is, you know what, man, we need to see new churches. So we're interested in church planting. how can we start new churches? And you know the barrier of that here, it's like the traditional church planting model, so you're talking about $200,000, right? And a huge attrition, failure rate, whatever you want to call that. And a model really that you're really not necessarily gathering new disciples out of the harvest, you're gathering existing Christians.
Right.
And really you're just transfer growth, swapping spit, not contributing to the kingdom. So what would it look like to actually do like some biblical church planning? And there's some churches that are like open to that. Hey, you want to start another church? And the other one is some churches are asking, man, how we would love to mobilize our own missionaries. Like, here. We want to be a sending church. We don't want to just, give to the cooperative program, give to Lottie Moon, or give to missions. We want to participate. We want to go. We want to send people. How can we prepare people to go over there? We found that these are really the three kind of entry points where if a church is saying, hey, we need help making disciples, or we want to learn about how to start a new church, and we might not have a lot of money or means to do it, but we're open to exploring that, or we want to learn how we can send our own missionaries, right? That starting with wherever they are, that's usually a good entry point for training. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So do you have any churches that you know of that are asking this question? We could use some help in making disciples.
Probably.
No? Yeah? I mean, how about all those plateaued and declining ones?
Yeah.
Are they asking that question?
No, they need to be.
Okay. All right.
That's the problem. Half the time they don't know what they need to be doing.
Okay. All right. Anyone asking the question about church planting? I know some of you guys are asking that question.
Yeah.
Are any churches asking that question? Yeah. Well, the question of, hey, we want to send our own missionaries.
Southern Baptist
Yeah.
churches.
Yeah. The church I serve in right now, we had two families. I was just telling you, we had two families getting ready to go overseas, and I invited them out into the harvest, share the gospel, make disciples, to actually do the kind of things they said they're going to do when they hit the ground in China. They never took me up on it. I gave them multiple opportunities, right? Come train with me, go with me, come on, let's do it. It's like, no. But one of the families told me, yeah, but when I go to China, then I'm really going to have to trust Jesus. And it was almost like all of a sudden I'm going to be the spiritual Jason Bourne, right? When I step off the plane, I'm going to start oblong the local language, and I'm going to start making disciples, and I'm going to start doing all this stuff. It's like, no, you're not. You're not. I guarantee you're not. Those two families are not going overseas. They're washed out. And really, they're just kind of in pieces. And now you families are in a point of crisis. Now I can actually train you guys maybe. We'll see. They're open to that. So it's kind of like, what we found is that these are kind of entry points with existing churches that we can say, look, let's create some space. Let's create an experimental zone, right? Where you guys can start doing this. Okay? So here's some of what we learned. I just want to lay out kind of what we're learning and to share it with you guys. This is emerging as a fruitful practice for training existing churches in North America, okay? So what we find is, like Mark said, we talked about, Ephesians 4, and we had 8 apostles, prophets, evangelists, okay? And we had PTs, pastor teachers, shepherd teachers, right? That verse says that Christ gave, right? This is a gift that Jesus gives to his churches, right? And we can or we can't. It doesn't matter if you separate these two, but the main point is, you have some people, what are these leaders supposed to do? What it says is to equip the saints for what? So these kind of giftings, these kinds of leaders, what do they do? Do they do the work?
The train.
They train people to do the work, right? They're equippers, right? In an institutional phase, who are the equippers? Who are the rock stars? Who are the people, equipping the church? It's the pastor teachers, right? Where do the apes go?
Out.
They go overseas. They join a parachurch organization, right? They join crew. They join some organization outside the church where they could fulfill kind of what God is calling and gifting them to do. They have no space within the existing church to realize, to be activated, or to even practice the kind of person God is gifting them to be. Right?
Yep.
Now, in the sweet spot, there's room for apes. There's room for your people who aren't just about getting deep, but actually going wide with the gospel and disciple making, right? So, what do? So here's the thing. Your existing church, legacy church, building church has been around for a long time, right? It's really dominated by your shepherd teachers, your pastor teachers, right? Again, good things, right? Like we saw in the letter to the church in Ephesus in Revelation. Like, you guys are doing good at defending doctrine, keeping out the false teachers, the false apostles, right? You're defending, you're guarding, you're shepherding the flock. That's to be commended. But what are you not doing? Who are not, what's not happening is what happened at first in Ephesus, which was the gospel going out. The leaders and the potential leaders that are sitting unactivated in your churches are the apes. They're those people that, and these people exist. They have that holy discontent, right? They have that, I know I'm supposed to make disciples. I just don't know how to get started, And just to sit under preaching of people telling them, go make disciples, obey the Great Commission, and not anyone else who's like an ape that can come down and let me show you how to get started. Let me show you what it looks like to do this. Those people are just going to get frustrated. They're going to hang in there and live under guilt and frustration, or they're going to leave or whatever. So what we found is what needs to happen is, just as the PTs are really strong in existing churches, apes need to be identified, encouraged, empowered, and released in their local context. Because if we just release them to the mission field only, or we release them to parachurch organizations, guess what? It doesn't benefit the church. It doesn't benefit the area. You're telling them they got to go somewhere else or get out of town before they can actually be who the Lord is calling them to be. So how do you create space? And so what we found is really helpful is we just call 3 touches of training. Okay? So this is this is not the only way, but this has been a fruitful way in America to get started with an existing church. If you have an existing church that says, hey, I could use help in making disciples, we could use help in thinking through church planning, or we could use help in mobilizing missionaries, and usually they don't have all 3 of these, maybe they just have 1. Any one of these places is a great place to start. So the first touch is, we'll call it like a gospel conversations training. Okay? We'll call it a level 1 training. So the first meeting, we'll just call it gospel convo. That might be done during a day, like a day training or a day and a half, maybe a Friday night, Friday evening, Saturday, during the day on Sunday, right? And we'll pull people in. So, for example, I just talked to Melanie Farkas. She said right now in Michigan, she's got 10 or 12 people who can come in and help lead one of these trainings. Okay? So you can call me up, you can call Mark up, but there's people in Michigan that can do this. And what we would do is we'd call it a swarm training. So we would get a bunch of people, apes that are doing this in Michigan and in the area. We'd come in and we'd all do it together. And because we're doing it in our own fields, we come in with experience and we just lay down very basic, here's some simple tools, how to enter lost communities. Here's how you share the gospel. We use very simple tools like using prayer, right? 3 circles, very simple gospel way of walking through the gospel. Hey, where are you? Where do you want to be? What's the next step? Inviting them into discipleship. And then we also spending time modeling discipleship and practicing it. Here's how you do discipleship with a new believer. Starting from 0, maybe no church background. And then we'll spend an hour or 2 hours in that training, and we'll actually go out and we'll model it. We'll go just like Nicole said, we'll go 2 by 2, groups of 2s and 3s, apartment complex across the street, offer prayer, and we'll model and we'll show people how to do this and help them set goals so that in the following weeks they can put it into practice. So you have that gospel combo, training event, and then you have weekly rollout. Okay, so after this training, we're going to say, all right, so we're going to have this training. Now every week, 1 of 2 things. Either weekly harvest time, where you guys are getting out, sharing the gospel, or weekly practicing discipleship, where you're going out and you're sharing in your relational network. Or both, okay? So what you're doing is you give this training, and then you have them practice and participate in going through discipleship or getting out and sharing. And so they're putting it into practice in the meantime. And then you have a second touch of training. And that's usually, somewhere like 3 to 5 months out. And so, or 2 to 5, yeah, 2 to 5. 2 to 5 months out, you have a second one. And what you do for the second training? You do the exact same training. Not different at all. You don't teach them something new. Okay? You do the same training on how to connect with the lost, how to get into gospel conversations, how to start discipling the fruit. The only difference is this time, I'll use a different color. The swarm team coming in is only training 50% of it. You know who's training the other 50%? The people from that church or those churches who are at the training who've been doing it. Okay? So you're moving from modeling. So the swarm team comes in and we model how to do it. We help people to start doing it throughout the week. And then the second one, we're now assisting them, and some of them are stepping up with stories from the harvest, and they're starting to lead part of the training. So the swarm team will lead 50% of the second gospel conversation training. Again, same thing again. Weekly rollout. All right. Weekly harvest time and or weekly going through the discipleship and reaching out to your relational network. Then you have the third touch. Okay? Again, the exact same training, nothing different. We're not trying to give people information. We're trying to pass on skills that they can put into practice so they can start making disciples. And we want to have them now lead 100% of the training. And the swarm team will come in and we will watch and we'll step in if we need to. But we want them to lead the training, right?
So another 3 to 5 months.
Yeah, again, another 3 to 5 months, okay? All right? And at this third gospel conversation training, we're going to have them set some big goals, okay? So how are you going to take this that we've journeyed through these 3 touches of training with a rollout every single week, right? We're setting maybe like 3-month to 6-month goals. Hey, how are you going to now put this into, your life? And how are you going to continue to do this? And what we found is that by the third touch, we can start identifying out of these churches emerging leaders. We can start develop a team of people. Hey, these people, they've been doing it, putting it into practice, and they're leading it now. They can continue to lead it in their church, and they're leading out of experience because they're doing it. We have an emerging team, right? And they're coming into their local church and they're sharing stories, right? And it's those stories from the harvest that begin to flip the church and be able to bring, if these apes are the early adopters, everyone else are kind of the late adopters. You want to get those early adopters and get them moving, and they're going to come in with stories of like people coming to faith and boldly sharing the gospel and stuff happening, new believers being discipled, and they're coming with these stories, and the church is like, whoa, that's awesome. Hey, if he could do that, why can't I, right? Okay? And then after that, we have a team. And so what you create is through 3 touches of training, you eventually be able to create, you call it like you ever heard of like skunk works?
Yeah.
What's a skunk work?
It's where they build top secret or invent top secret
Yeah.
weapons and airplanes.
Top secret. And the way they did it is they kind of they kind of pushed aside all the bureaucracy and the checks and all that kind of stuff, and they created an experimental zone, right? Where, hey, you engineers, go for it. Try to make a stealth jet, right? What you want to create is an experimental zone for your team that's still connected to the church, but it's more like a ministry of the church, right? But these people have permission because they've proven themselves in doing the work and making disciples. They have permission from the pastor in the church to go for it in connection to the church. And this team, these are the ones who are going to be making disciples, and that can begin to see multiplication. You can begin to see new groups start, right? And they have the freedom, and they have the freedom to do that. But it's a process of getting there. Okay? Now I could fill in some blanks. I just wanted to lay that out to you. Let's process through this a little bit. So what do you guys? First of all, any questions about kind of what this process could look like?
I guess I'm trying to understand the context of the gospel conversation, the 3-touch meetings that you have. Is this on like a church level or multiple churches sending people to this?
Yeah, we've done it both and.
Okay.
We've done it if we've had a church maybe that was big enough or on board enough. They would host the gospel conversations training. They would invite everyone in the whole church, and 10% maybe would come, or whatever, and then we would do it from the church. There's other times where it's been a whole bunch of churches, so we would do it for a whole area, right? And so we have multiple churches. We do it in maybe a good location or a neutral location, right? And we would just offer the training, and we would try to network and connect with local churches. They could be with a certain association or even just evangelicals in general. So yeah, we've had it both a bunch of churches involved. We've even done it in individual churches. It doesn't matter. Okay. So for example, when I came, 3 touches of training. I'm in a evangelical free church, and so we did it inside the church at first. So I invited Mark and a couple others from Cincinnati because they were getting started. They came up and they were part of my swarm team. So we came in, did first touch. We did the full thing, right? And then we rolled it out. Weekly harvest time. Some people did the weekly harvest time. Some people did the weekly commands of Christ. Second touch, I had about a little more than 50% of it was done in-house. So these were local people that were now doing it from the church I was in. And they were leading about half of the training, and then we were doing the rest. Okay. Again, weekly rollout, same thing. By the time the third one, they led the full thing, and I've identified a couple people, right? And not a ton of people, but really about 5 or 6 people who are really just doing it and running with it. And those people are now coming back to the church with stories every single week. They're coming back with stories of people they're discipling, people they're discipling who are sharing the gospel, how they're sharing the gospel, and stories are just coming in from this team. And I'm just keep pouring fire through coaching and all that kind of stuff, helping them just keep moving forward. And the way I created a experimental group is I just said, hey, I'm going to start a church planning residency. I just put a name to it. And I said, here's your requirement. You want to be part of my church planning residency? Here's the thing. We're gonna be putting this into practice. And so what the basic commitment I need for you is you're going to commit to 2 hours in the harvest, 2 hours of training others every single week, and 2 hours where we get together and get trained. So we have a training team here, the residency, 2 hours of training. They're spending 2 hours in the harvest every single week and 2 hours training others. And they're just rolling. It's awesome. But they needed that by making a church planning residency, right? That's how in the church that I'm in, I create a little experimental zone, right? So that there's a little bit of permission and freedom to pursue this. And the people who are in here, they're saying no to Bible study fellowship. They're saying no to all kinds of stuff because it's like this is what they want to do because they're apes. And through this training, I filtered down and identified those apes, putting them together so they're learning from one another and they're learning from others outside, like MPL and other places as well, and they're putting into practice. Okay.
How do you know at the weekly rollout what you would do that week, whether it's harvest or discipleship or commands of Christ?
Commit to either one or the other, or both if you can. So it could be kind of a big commitment if you do one evangelism training, right, or gospel conversations training. And if you say, all right, here's what you need to do every single week, you spend an hour or 2 hours in the harvest with somebody, out knocking on doors, sharing the gospel, that sort of thing, and you spend 2 hours going through the discipleship and multiplication piece. Sometimes that's a big commitment, right? And so we just say, just choose one of those, right? So maybe starting out, the first thing that you need to do is you need to commit every single week getting out into the harvest, right? And getting reps in of connecting with people, sharing the gospel, getting from gospel to discipleship, that sort of thing. Or maybe what you need to do is you already have people that you can journey with and train with, and so you get together and you start going through the discipleship and helping them to get out sharing in their relational network. So usually, typically what we find is you shoot for both if you can, but at the very least one or the other. Hey, weekly, get out in the harvest, put this to practice in between the trainings, right? Because if you're not using it, it's just, it's not training, right? We're not here to get information, we're here to get skills of obeying Jesus so that we can obey him, we can show others how to obey him as well. Yeah.
Because the goal is not the event, just
Right.
getting out.
Yeah. That's right. Really what you're looking for too is you do the first touch, second touch, third touch. You're looking for who are the people who are actually coming back with stories because they're doing it. Yeah. Right? And the outsider, the trainers, if you need to help them, if they're doing weekly harvest, if you can get out with them, get out with them. Do it with them. If they're meeting in the discipleship groups, if you can go to that, help them get started, do that. If you got to do it online, you can do it online. Okay? If they got to do it on their own, that's okay. But ideally, you want to help walk with them through this.
There's one layer here, Dave, if you don't mind me jumping in.
Yeah, go for it.
We are associational leaders. You work with churches. When you say that you want to conduct a training like this, you won't get every church. And you're not naive, and I'm not naive. You're just not. You're going to get some of those, especially if you have good relationships with pastors. They'll want to be here. They'll show up. From that, I think it would be great, even if you had 2 or 3 pastors, where you literally said, let's just